All right, so we're here for Carbide in the hot seat. Always love to have new people in to chat about a new subject that is, I think, interesting to a lot of people and probably something that a lot of people don't understand. To start us off, I'm James Boyle. I'm the manager of partnerships and channel here for Carbide. And Ryan, I wonder if you could introduce yourself and tell folks about what you do for Trava.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on and having the Trava team on as well. I'm Ryan Dunn, for those listening, Director of Insurance here at Trava. In the insurance sphere of things, we help insurance agencies better sell and better underwrite cyber insurance. What that entails for the end customers is more insurability, better insurance premiums, and better coverage.
And you do that with technology, do you?
Yeah. So Trava is a software platform that agencies adopt, and they use our cybersecurity expertise as well to help improve their cybersecurity posture for their insurance renewal, which, like I said, impacts their cyber insurance renewal overall and their purchasing process as well.
I mean, it makes sense. The world is getting more complicated every day, especially from a technology point of view. And to really get an understanding of the insurance side of things, especially cyber insurance, maybe we can chat about what exactly is cyber insurance versus all the other insurance that businesses need to carry.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. I love this question. If we go to the root of cyber insurance, like what is cyber insurance? Why do companies need it? It's one of the hardest parts about it is the fact that it is not a tangible insurance product, right? It's not like property insurance where you specifically know if my property is damaged in some way that I can recuperate whatever costs are associated with that. When it comes to cyber insurance, it's obviously an intangible product where you're covering data that you can't touch and feel, right? It's covering any costs associated with the loss of that data, the inability for that company to operate if their systems are bricked. It's covering, if you send a wire out to the wrong address, if your customer thinks they're wiring you funds and they send it out to the wrong address, it covers that as well. So it covers that whole infrastructure that you can't touch or feel. But if you also look at, okay, why does cyber insurance exist? And really, if you go to that question, you really need to look at why was insurance started in the first place. And so, back when companies operated outside or in brick and mortar, they needed property, they needed GL types of lines of insurance, right? Because if something happened to that building, that company couldn't operate, couldn't produce income, right? So that's why insurance started, right? It was all based around that brick and mortar store. Well, now that we've moved more towards a digital infrastructure in today's age, every business, whether you are a blue collar or white collar business, you have and operate on some type of digital infrastructure and have some type of digital infrastructure risk. And so the importance of cyber insurance is increasingly becoming important, almost from being a bells and whistles coverage 5 years ago, 6 years ago, to being the main coverage that you need as a business. And so, we can dig into more about, why that's important, but just to give everybody kind of a concept of how why is it important that we're shifting as we shift our infrastructure and how we operate our business to a digital world, how we need to pivot our insurance strategy with it.
I mean, it's an interesting, thanks. I mean, first off, thanks for that explanation, because it even helps me understand it better, obviously. It makes a lot of sense to me. When it comes down to when should you get cyber insurance, you mentioned that it's like, it used to be bells and whistles 5 years ago. Yeah. But I was thinking the same thing. If you have email and you have the basic digital infrastructure, does general liability cover those things? And does that mean that if it doesn't, every business needs some sort of cyber insurance? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, when you need to get cyber insurance is immediately, and a lot of companies, especially small businesses, think, oh well, I'm too small. They don't want, the hacker doesn't want to come after me. Like, why would they want my data? And the rebuttal towards that is actually you are the target. you the small business are the target, and so the reason being is because you don't have the resources, whether that be people or monetary resources, to keep your digital security infrastructure up to par, right? And so that's why it's paramount to get cyber insurance coverage immediately. If you're buying property, GL, workers' comp, any type of insurance, you should be buying a cyber insurance policy with it. Additionally, you mentioned email. That is the main piece of the cyber insurance coverage that everybody should be paying attention to, especially small businesses, because that is your biggest risk when it comes to your cyber, your digital infrastructure is your people risk when it comes to wiring funds or receiving funds from your customers. Nothing worse than your customer wiring you, let's say $20,000, thinking they're wiring it to you, but a hacker somehow got into their system or your system and provided them fake credentials. They think they paid you, they didn't pay you, and now you don't have the money. And your customer's like, well, I'm not sending you another 20 grand. So yeah, it's a super, super important piece for small businesses.
So you're basically saying that almost any small business, if they have email, then they should have some sort of cyber insurance coverage?
100%. There's no doubt about it. That, like, in my mind, that is the paramount coverage to have. Here in the States, it's workers' comp is mandatory. So you get workers' comp, you have to, if you have more than 3 to 5 employees, depending on the state. And then, cyber insurance, EPLI, like these are all basic coverages that you need to get. General liability. So cyber insurance should be in your peer view whenever you're making your risk management decisions.
I mean, so interesting, obviously, to think about, even if you just have an email running for your business, that you need it.
I know.
Considering that, what are companies looking for? Like, what do cyber insurance companies look for in the business they're talking to? And maybe talk about the differences between like a SaaS business versus like a brick and mortar that runs email,
Yeah. Now, when you say insurance, are you saying what are insurance carriers looking for when it comes to like underwriting that, or?
Yeah, like what are the things that they pay attention to, like,
Yeah.
In your business to make sure that they can underwrite you for cyber insurance?
Yeah. So, across the board, it's multi-factor authentication, specifically on your like AWS infrastructure, Google or Azure. So whether you're running Microsoft 365, or whether you're running Gmail, make sure to have multi-factor authentication for all employees. Some of them look for EDR, endpoint detection response systems in place, depending on the business. And there's a few other like 10 controls that they're looking for, like, hey, do you get somebody to sign off on a wire before it's sent out, like an independent person? Do you do security awareness training? That human risk factor is huge. So those are the things that across the board, every business needs to have: security awareness training, MFA enabled, EDR, backup, data backups is huge. No matter what type of business you are, whether you are a construction company or if you're a SaaS company, you need that. Now, where they start to differ is kind of in that SaaS.
Right.
Right. If you're a SaaS company, they're really going to pay attention to your security controls, But damn, like you need that put limits of liability in your contracts as a SaaS company, because the carriers are really going to be looking at that contract and dissecting it to make sure that they can cover that tech E&O piece that's associated with the cyber policy.
And then from that point of view, then, and you talk about reviewing your contracts if you're a SaaS company. Overall, how do you demonstrate that you do have a strong security posture and to ensure that they give you, say, the best rates, or what's determining those rates after you show them your posture?
Yeah, that's really gonna come down to your agent, and this is where having, James, we've talked about this before, having a agent that specializes in this line is super important right now. Not a lot of agents are up to speed on what you need to do, and honestly, it's kind of what that's where Trava is coming in to help those agents. But what you need to be doing as a business is working with an agent to put together what we call an underwriting presentation. And that underwriting presentation basically describes the maturity of your security posture. And any agency that focuses on cyber insurance has some type of checklist or some type of way to put together like a report or like a story for the underwriter. So working with any type of agency that does that is huge.
And maybe this is a good time to talk about services like Trava's, because that plays such a strong role in demonstrating that, right?
Yeah.
And how is Trava helping demonstrate that?
Yeah, it's, part of it is we're helping agencies do it at scale, because that is a time-consuming task. But we're giving agencies the ability to run vulnerability scans that carriers are using to help underwrite the risk. And so we've moved this from a reactive stance where the agents have typically just sent their customers out to quote, and then they get requests back from the underwriter. Hey, they have these open ports, they have these things they need to fix. And now the agent and the customer are scrambling. And there's a good chance that some people listening to this right now have experienced that last minute scramble. And so Trava is helping that agent scan that customer's security infrastructure. And then we have a programmatic report that's made that describes, hey, you need to fix these 5 things before you go out to renewal, right? And then from there, once they fix them, they can programmatically download the cybersecurity infrastructure maturity of that customer and distribute that out to the carrier.
And that's how the carrier's determining rates, or is that how the carrier is determining if they even want to work with you, or both?
Yeah, both. Yeah, we had one customer recently. Now this is a larger business, but we have examples of small business working in small businesses and large middle market companies. Middle market being like 100 million to 700 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. The small business is more. We have examples of premiums being reduced from 12,000 to 9,000. Increasing the amount of carriers that are quoting, so increasing competition to quote the business and write it. And then we have examples of carriers, they wouldn't write this large political campaign, but because this agency was using the Trava report, the carrier said, hey, like, we trust this, we like this, we will give you terms. So increasing that ability to want to work with certain types of risks.
And when you think about compliance in the sense of evaluating risk, I should say, how does like a SOC 2, like a strong SOC 2 audit report come into play, or a ISO 27001 certification? Does that play a role immediately? And how does that affect, the overall picture of the company to the cyber insurance underwriter?
Yeah. So this is something interesting because it's a conversation that's been going around in the cyber insurance world, SOC 2s and the ISOs are super important compliance frameworks to abide by, obviously, to conduct business. A lot of people in the insurance world are lobbying for that to be used more when it comes to underwriting. And right now, those frameworks aren't directly impacting premium, right? You can't go, oh, because you have a SOC 2, you're going to get better insurance premiums. However, it helps so much in the story. Remember that story I was telling you about?
Mm-hmm.
When the agent's saying, hey, they're SOC 2 compliant, that helps that story so much to be like, hey, they're on top of their cybersecurity infrastructure. And by the way, because they're SOC 2 compliant, they have MFA in place. They have these backup strategies. They have an incident response plan. They have, all of those things that are accompanied with a SOC 2 or an ISO can play very strongly into reducing premium. So, you can't go, yes, SOC 2 does it, but the controls that are put in place because of SOC 2 do have an impact on premium and insurability.
That makes sense. I could totally see that then. And talking about it in this manner, maybe it's obvious, but just sort of to reiterate, if SOC 2 is making an impact, if ISO 27001 certification makes an impact, if being able to demonstrate that you have MFA turned on and all these things, if that helps you, not having those things on, would we say that today's market is harder than ever to get it? Like, is there more that you have to do today than you had to do 5 years ago? Is it getting more complicated? And all these things that we're talking about, is that making the process more difficult? And are they basically getting harder and harder, or are they denying more and more people, I guess, is another way to ask it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, peculiar place we're in right now when it comes to cyber insurance. When you talk about, is it harder to get than 5 years ago? 1000%. 8 years ago, I was quoting cyber insurance and it was 5 questions long. It was almost a competition who could ask the least amount of questions. Premium was $200, right? And so and now it's 15 pages and, average premiums gone from 200 to 1700 in USD, right? When you talk about, is it harder to get now versus 6 months ago? It's actually, the answer is no. 6 months ago, we were in a very hard market, but now it's softened up a little bit due to 3 years of 100% or more increases across the board. It has softened up also because of ILS structures. So insurance-linked securities is ILS. And what that's done is it's influxed a ton of capital into the market. And so because there's more capital backing, underwriters are more comfortable underwriting things and taking on more risk. Now, do I think that's going to last? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I think we're kind of in like a return to normal fairy world right now. I wish I could come up with a better term than that, but I've seen carriers even reduce their what they require from an underwriting standpoint, which is mind-boggling to me.
Yes.
So I think we're one bad claim away from being right back in it, and that's inevitable. But just cybersecurity in general, right? It's not an if, it's a when thing, and being prepared for that.
This conversation and what you just said makes me think about the small to medium-sized business, or even like that medium-sized $100 to $700 million company. Are they trying to find anyone to insure them? Like, are they desperate? Like, who's going to insure me? Please insure me. I need it. Or is there competition? Can you shop around? Yeah. Is it possible to do that? Or is it really like, I hope someone will insure me because it's too hard to get otherwise? What position are our businesses in?
Yeah, it's such an it depends answer. I'm seeing so many examples. One example, one of our wholesale agencies, they're working on a SaaS business right? And this SaaS business is 105 million in revenue, right? Their retail agent is shopping it around, but they're having a really tough time finding terms, right? And so this is kind of where what I'm talking about is having a cyber specific broker is super important, because now that wholesaler has gone out and they've found the market immediately, right? So it's like it is so vital to be working with somebody that can tell your story, that can put together, hey, like, yes, we've gotten a SOC 2 done, so this broker knows how to dissect that, create the story around it, right, and distribute it out. So it's such a it depends answer. Yes, some companies, specifically SaaS, are like, please anybody quote me, and some of them are like, they have 5 or 6 quotes that they can analyze.
And so when it comes down to that, when you talk about finding that broker, it really is like talking to other companies in your area, probably companies like yours, trying to find out what's worked, what hasn't. There's a lot of research to this, maybe more than, say, traditional insurance. It's a bit more understood. I understand what you're saying. It's sort of like, I don't want to say buyer beware. That's not the right term, but it's really on the buyer. It's really on that business to say, I'm going to do some research on who I should talk to, because depending on the broker, they're going to get varying degrees of response. That means, right? If they don't have experience with cyber, almost forget about it, or you're just complicating your life.
Yeah, and cyber insurance is one of those coverages. It's so different than, let's say, like auto. Like, do not think about cyber as like auto insurance or anything like that. It is so different. Number one, cyber insurance blends state lines. Like, a lot of times people will use an insurance agency that's in their immediate area, which I understand. But, don't be afraid to work with an agency that's completely on the other side of the country, right? Because the cyber exposure is the same, the same it is we're talking in the States realm, like same in Oregon as it is in Florida, right?
Sure.
And so, having a broker in that area isn't extremely important for cyber specific, right? Additionally, it's not like a lot of people think about insurance as like, oh, I'm just going to, whatever broker I use, they have access to all these markets, so I'm going to get, the best quote. It's not true, right? That it's every agent has access to pretty much all of the same markets. So there's no like, whenever an agent's like, oh, well, we have 40 plus markets. Well, so does everybody else. It comes down to what I keep on reiterating. It's like, you need to work with somebody that, yes, has access to those markets, but knows how to talk to them as well.
Right. And the key thing is really, really that person that knows how to speak your language. And that's probably the same if you're a professional services, organization like architect or doctor's office.
Yes.
You want to make sure that your broker understands the complexities of that business compared to cyber versus someone who understands venture-backed SaaS companies. Those are two very different things. So you might end up with two very different brokers that understand the complexities of each, maybe.
100%. Like doctors' offices, they have Internet of Things exposure, and those things are not cyber secure at all. Like, if we look at a recent Internet of Things claims example, we look at the Target point of sale breach, and that breach actually came through their HVAC company.
Oh, it's crazy.
I know. So their HVAC company put out a software update, and in that software update was something that needed to be patched. It was exploited. That hacker was able to get through that Internet of Things device all the way into Target's point of sale systems. And that is crazy to me. So, like, people just need to realize, like, doctors' offices, yes, you have exposure from an email standpoint, you have exposure from the things that run your building, like if they are running on your network, that is an exposure, and people can find a way. So
everything's connected, I guess, right? That's the,
like we said, we run on a digital infrastructure. You know, a great way to think about it is, what would you rather lose, your phone or your wallet? And I would always say my wallet, because if I lose my phone, I can't operate.
yeah.
I can't contact my family, my friends. You know, I have my bank information on there. I have personal information, you know. And so if I lose that, I'm toast. If I lose my wallet, I can easily get it replaced. You know, I still can send digital payments. So, you know, I'm still operating if I have my phone.
Well, here. I mean, I agree. I'd be the same way. And it makes you think about how connected we are, but it also, this might be a stupid question, but I doubt Target had HVAC cyber insurance policies. So what happens when it's like a complicated breach like that? Like, you know, are cyber insurance companies starting to, you know, well, we'll underwrite this part, but we're not going to underwrite any connected devices that are not tested every 6 months. Like
100%.
in that Target example, I would think that they might say your HVAC system isn't covered in your cyber insurance policy. Like, how does that work when something like that innovative happens?
Yeah, you're right. You know, it can come. This can be related to SaaS companies as well, and that limits of liability. So, 100%. You know, it's there's a lot of language, and this is why it depends on, you know, you need to choose your insurance carrier super specifically, because some carriers, their policies read terribly, you know, and it's brutal, and you'll be in a claims lawsuit for a long time trying to sift through it. Others read very favorably towards the insured. Obviously that one's going to cost more. And so it really depends on your overall goal as a business. Like, are you trying to get covered, or are you just trying to have a piece of paper for like a contract, right? You just need to be honest with yourself about what you want. You know, in my mind, now this is me, I either go either or. I don't try to play middle, because in the middle, you're just going to fall into the piece of paper bucket, right? Mm-hmm. So you know, I would always pay more for more favorable coverage than not.
So that sort of, as we round this out, then there's a key thing that comes to mind. Thinking about what you just said, which would be probably important to some of the things you want to be thinking about. What are the top things that small businesses should be thinking about when they're looking at coverage? One of which is this: is it favorable terms, or is it a bit ambiguous and you could be in lawsuits for years, but at least you're covered somewhat? That might be one thing to look for. Is there anything else? Like, if you had to pick your top 2 or 3 things, what are you looking for in that coverage, in that policy?
Yeah. Number one for any business, obviously going to be business email compromise. That's huge. So anything related to like funds transfer fraud, social engineering, invoice manipulation, having that in your policy form is huge. To get that coverage, make sure you are conducting quarterly security awareness training, if not monthly. Additionally, you're going to want full limits on ransomware. A lot of insurance carriers are sublimiting that. And what that means is, let's say you buy $1 million in limits, aggregate limit for your cyber insurance policy. There's a good chance that your ransomware sublimit is $250,000. So if you have a ransomware event, it's only $250,000 in coverage. So full limits ransomware, hard to come by, but definitely worth paying for. So those are the first 2. You're also going to want business interruption. So that is, you know, if we're talking about a SaaS company, your software's inability to perform, right? And you have lost profits from that. whether that be from a cyber event or whether that be from a breakdown in code. That's where that business interruption comes into play. Those would be the first three I would pay attention to. If we got into the weeds of it, my favorite language to read is pay on your behalf. This comes in if there's a claim. Instead of you, the business, fronting the cost and getting reimbursed on the back end, the carrier puts up the money first, and then you settle the claim from there. So super important for being able to still conduct business, still operate. And that is a very specific line that not a lot of agents go over with their clients. And so I think that's a very important piece.
I guess another big piece of this, before we go, I should touch on it, and because I'm not sure I understand it myself. You mentioned business interruption. I would have thought that'd be covered under general liability. So yeah. So before we go, we should really touch on how these things overlap. We know about what we should look for now, but is some of that covered in general? Does it read like some of it is? And really, when you look at all the insurance you need to get, how do you keep those two things where you're not double paying, for instance, for certain things? Yeah. So what are you looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, there is overlap, sure. But I would never rely. I would never rely on my GL policy to cover that from a cyber event. There's going to be exclusions in your GL policy that are related to that. If you can't conduct business because your systems are bricked, your GL policy isn't necessarily going to be covering that. That's going to fall into your cyber world. So that's super important to think about. Also, something you kind of bring up something here, James, like if we're talking specifically SaaS or like even hardware, like I used to have a client that was medical, it was goggle, like 3D goggles or virtual reality goggles. And there's somewhat of like a seizure exposure there, right? So if somehow the goggles malfunctioned, and whether that's due to a breach or whether that's due to something else, and that caused any type of harm, physical harm to that person, that's where you kind of want to see that in the general liability policy as well, just in case something like that happens. There is, you are going to want to see those coverages in your cyber policy as well, but I would definitely also include that in your GL policy just to have some extra overlap there.
So really, I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't, it's only getting more complicated. And everything you're saying just brings us back to the fact that you really need a broker that understands it all. Mm-hmm. So you want a broker that knows your industry, understands how to look at that report from Trava or any sort of report that generates open ports, yep. Proves your controls, all those things. And they also need to understand how your general liability may or may not cover certain events and how that all works together. So when you think about that, the number one takeaway I'm taking away, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, it seems like all this stuff funnels down to a strong broker, right? This is the number one thing you're looking for.
Yeah. And, a good way to just get a temperature check on that is to just, hey, how many clients, if you're a SaaS company, how many SaaS companies do you have, right? Or if they haven't really used SaaS companies, like, are you going to be using a wholesale broker that specializes in cyber? Because then that wholesale broker could do a pretty good job for that retail agent. So not saying immediately fire your agent and find somebody cyber specific, but ask those two questions. If they're using a wholesale broker that specializes in cyber, and they've done a good job for you and they're timely on their communication, that I think it's fine. But as long as either they or the wholesale broker are somehow cyber certified, then I would definitely go with them.
So I'd ask you one last thing. If I sort of called you up and said, give me the best, most important thing you could think of when it comes to cyber insurance, even if you've said it already in this conversation, what would be that one thing? Is it the broker?
When it comes to the best possible thing for you as a business to do in the insurance coverage, business email compromise, get that covered. When it comes to obtaining it, broker, go cyber specific. Get a broker that does this day in, day out, can speak the language. It'll do wonders for your wallet when it comes to the purchasing of the cyber insurance, and in the event of a claim, that you'll be very happy you did so.
Amazing. Well, look, Ryan, I appreciate your expertise, especially on a subject that I think is hard for a lot of us to understand. So thank you so much for taking the time to explain it today. And if anyone has questions, can they contact you?
Yeah, reach out to me, ryan.dunn at travasecurity.com. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm constantly posting about cyber insurance and cybersecurity on LinkedIn. So if you want more tidbits and me echoing these statements or clarifying these statements, reach out to me. I'd love to have a chat. Those are the two best ways to find me.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for your time today. And I appreciate this conversation. I know I learned a lot. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, James.